and Paul Johnson and John Gibbons just over there. John, you can see him. As we're settled in and looking forward to a weekend of Premier League action, we're going to talk a little bit about that in general up the top of this show coming up as well. I'm talking to Sajid about what's gone on in Turkey. If you listen to this as a podcast in Syria with the earthquake and some fundraising efforts he's doing from Born and Red. And John, you spoke to
Chris Roberts earlier today, who's written a book about greed and football. And as a fundraiser for Sean's place in Liverpool. So yeah, I spoke to him earlier today as well.
That is coming up if you listen to this as a podcast. If you're enjoying it as part of our YouTube offering, you are more than welcome. It's good to have you on board. Before we get into literally what the manager said at his press conference today, and also just in general looking ahead to Newcastle, I want to sort of start this off. I'll go to you first, Neil Jones. There was something in not just in the Arsenal result, but also the Newcastle result and performance away at Bournemouth last weekend, where all of a sudden, this is off the back of Arsenal obviously having a poor result themselves against Brentford, getting beat at Goodison Park. There was something that just sort of made me wonder if a couple of the sides that have been able to sort of tear the strip, who you might not have thought would be quite where they would be, were suddenly finding it a little bit trickier this season. I thought Arsenal versus City was fascinating. The quality wasn't quite where I thought it might be, but ultimately City had gears that Arsenal just didn't quite have over the course of the 90 minutes.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Yeah, I suppose what you see, I watched the Newcastle game actually last Saturday as well at Bournemouth, and I think what you see is how well they've done, both those teams, to get where they've got to, but also that they're not used to sustaining that level of performance. And that's been one of the things that Liverpool and Manchester City have made teams do pretty much, isn't it? They've made teams look and say, well, we have to get 90 points plus, don't we? If we want to win the league, we have to get probably, 75, 80 points to get in the Champions League. And yeah, I think you saw the limitations of the Newcastle squad. I think maybe as well the fact that they've got a final on the horizon, which is obviously a massive deal for them, potential to win a trophy. You were seeing maybe them be a bit cautious with the team selection, with leaving Wilson out, maybe being a bit cautious with some of the subs and taking Almiron off. And maybe you saw a little bit of that with Arsenal as well, that maybe they were thinking a few things, worrying for the longer term instead of the here and now, with Ben White, for example, not playing the game and certain other things. I know our Arsenal correspondent at Goal, Charles, has been calling for Arteta to make a few changes with Martinelli and Trossard and players like that, but maybe they're not used to that rhythm of sort of being able to do that and feeling safe. They feel like they have to go and try and win every game. So yeah, I thought, I wouldn't sort of write Arsenal off on the back of that, but I did think they sort of, the last half hour of that game in particular, sort of a little bit of it was almost like they looked over the edge of the cliff and thought, oh, right, okay, yeah, are we actually ready to sort of really go at these? And maybe Newcastle are feeling something a little bit similar with the top four.
I think it's been, these sides, listen, let's be clear about this. Newcastle, for instance, have had a couple of injury issues through the season. They spent a lot of money on Isak. It doesn't quite come for them. They've had Sam Maximan missing as well. But all of a sudden last weekend, they end up with 3 going off with injuries during the game, Paul. Willock is one of them, and he looks like he'll miss this one. The other 2, as Neil says, may well be precautions. But they were missing sort of 5 lads before a ball was kicked. And this is where, we've had a lot of that during this campaign, and it's very, very well documented. And I've got a bit of sympathy when it happens. I've got a bit of sympathy when it happens to any side, that all of a sudden you're slightly denuded of options. Arsenal, it was interesting to me that Partey, who's been important to them, it's the biggest game of the season, and all of a sudden he needs to miss it from nowhere. That's what hasn't been happening to Arsenal week in, week out. And there is a lot of toll on these footballers. We talk about it all the time, and I do just sort of wonder if 1 or 2 others around the division who have been able to field really quite consistent 11s are suddenly going to find it a bit harder as we hit the run-in.
Yeah, I think what Neil alluded to it just a minute ago. We were saying about how difficult it is to keep these performances and put a run of games together. And what both City and Liverpool have done over the last few years is phenomenal when you look at it like that. And it's only when the teams who are now involved in it, your Newcastle, they get a couple of key injuries. Obviously Guimaraes is suspended as well. I think the impact on teams like Newcastle who aren't used to playing at this level week in, week out, and and fair play to them. They've been on a great run. Arsenal too, like Neil said, have been fantastic. But the minute some key little things happen, which again, in fairness to City, they've had a few injuries over the past few years when we've been in running. As of both City and Liverpool have managed to deal with that, I think, really well, considering what what impact it can have on your team and on your obviously your run of games. So it is very interesting to see that, you know, both are stuttering a little bit now. You know, I think Newcastle, they've drawn the last few games. Arsenal again have on a little bit of a bad run, and it's how you get out of that. You know, and I saw some Arsenal fans, you know, on Twitter just writing them off already. And you're like, well, come on, lads, you know, give yourself a break. You know, it is hard to keep up that run. But I just think with Newcastle as well, just those key injuries, and like Neil said, well, having the cup game coming up as well a week on Sunday, you're going to be thinking about that. You know, it's a long time since they've been in the final, so it is interesting to see how they manage all these things at the moment.
Yeah, I'll just echo what both of you said, really, in that, you know, you can look for reasons why, you know, teams are struggling and stuff like that. And Newcastle, to be fair, have had injuries all season and have coped really well with it, but it gets to the point where, you know, you're asking lads to go a lot, and their performances sort of drop from there. And Arsenal have barely rotated, and at some point, you know, it's going to have that sort of impact, really. But, you know, what I would say is, for both those teams, like you've said, it's the main thing is it's just so hard to start in August, go to May, and, you know, think you can, you know, go as relentlessly as what Liverpool and City have. You know, having a bad month should be fine and used to be fine, and that's all it might be. You know, for both teams, really, it's just sort of a bad month. But we've got to the position where, you know, apparently suddenly it isn't possible, and, you know, whether we'll see. If it's tiredness, it might not come back. If it's just a bad month, you know, they will, and we'll have to sort of see on that, really, for you know, the future, for you know, let's hope for, you know, either whether it's a bad month or a drop off, it just continues on Liverpool for Saturday night, or for Liverpool.
We've got a hope around that, Neil. I'm intrigued by, in amongst all of this, where we do or don't think top four is, because all of a sudden here, you know, you're looking at a Newcastle side that haven't won over 50% of the games. It's worth pointing that out. You know, United at the minute look impressive, but the games are going to start coming thick and fast. And there is something to be said about knowing course and distance. And Liverpool do know that. They do have that in their pocket, and we've got to bear that in mind with this side. We know how poor they've been. The manager knows how poor they've been. There's no getting away from how poor they've been game to game. But there is now, you know, there's a lot longer to go than we all think, and we all sort of feel like there is. For Liverpool, there's 17 games to go. They've got to find their way through, being able to work out how to do this. We've done it in the past, and it does just sort of look to me like Arsenal. Listen, they haven't even qualified for the Champions League last few seasons. They themselves have got to sort of work this out now, and Liverpool do know it. And where Newcastle are concerned, Newcastle haven't had the reality of it either, and Liverpool again do know it.
Yeah, and I mean, I sort of comment there in amongst the YouTube stuff about, you know, Arsenal have got Europa League coming back to come in the next few weeks, and, you know, that gives them an extra challenge. Never mind just in terms of the amount of games, but just in terms of the psychological element of playing on a Sunday when Man City maybe play an early kickoff or a Saturday afternoon, and they've all of a sudden the gap's a false gap because there's games in hand, but it's 6 points or 8 points, and they're suddenly thinking, oh wow, okay, we need to really win this game, you know, and it's maybe a bit of a tired legs from the midweek anyway, and, you know, it's not maybe the best atmosphere or that kind of thing. So there's challenges coming for Arsenal. You're right. I mean, I think what shouldn't be forgotten among Newcastle in particular, and a little bit with Arsenal, but I think Arsenal are a good side, a very good side, is a lot of these players are players who you wouldn't say are Champions League players. You know, some of them are. You know, Kieran Trippier is a good player, and Bruno Guimaraes is a good player, and you know, that's pretty much it, isn't it? Botman, maybe you'd say, yeah, he was signed with that proviso. The rest are sort of either at their level or above it, you know, in terms of players like Dan Burn and Fabian Schär and, you know, Sean Longstaff and players like that. They're not players who are sort of, they know they belong at this level. They're players who would almost surprise themselves a little bit and get into this position where it's like, wow, you know, we've got a real chance there of playing at that, you know, in this thing. And we saw with Liverpool, you know, it took Liverpool 2 seasons of qualifying for the Champions League on the last day of the season, and they were a better side than Newcastle. I think, you know, at that point they had better players than Newcastle generally, you know, but they still
they still looked a little bit and needed a little bit of luck. And, there's a few moments where they were thinking, have we blown it? And that kind
Emre Can overhead kicks.
Emre Can overhead kicks, and Simon Mignolet making some big saves in some games. I mean, they had to sign Virgil van Dijk mid-season, otherwise they probably wouldn't have made it in that, the very first or the season they got to the Champions League final. So there are lots of challenges to come, and you're right to say. I mean, 17 league games Liverpool have got left to play. I think the sort of elephant in the room, I suppose, is they really have to win this one, or certainly avoid defeat on Saturday. Not, if they can do that and put a bit of pressure on them, you can start suddenly sort of pulling my old clips from a couple of weeks ago and saying what we're on about.
The idea of avoiding defeat, I think, is massive in this one, Paul. The other thing I'd point out is that the current top 9, Liverpool sit 9th, so the 8 teams that are above them, the only one they've got to go to away from home left is Manchester City. At the end of this weekend, they'll played everyone else away from home who currently sits above them in the league table. Not getting beat, I think, is valuable in this one. It's not as simple as there'll be a desire, I think, to make it feel like it's a decider. And I do feel as though if Liverpool lose, it'll feel relatively decisive. It will become tough, and it will feel as though they're under a lot of pressure all of a sudden. But that said, I think that not losing the game is important, because there's a thing about sides that come 3rd and 4th. They drop points all the time. Mm-hmm. If you're only getting 70 points or 72 points to come 4th, that's, you're effectively there. You've missed out on 42 points over the course of a campaign. And that's the thing we need to remember, I think, is that you drop points all the time. But the flip side of that, from a Liverpool point of view, or a Chelsea point of view, or even a Brighton point of view, go on a run. If you go on a run where you win 5 out of 5, all of a sudden it looks really different, because everyone else drops points all the time. The important thing is not losing.
Yeah, I definitely think, some of the comments are coming up as well about, winning away, because our away form this season has been particularly poor, compared to what it has been in other years. I think, though, what you've said, if all of a sudden, if you look at them when you see the table and you see the red, marks against it when you've had a loss, if you can just start, getting rid of those, so that's why I think obviously, best case scenario, we go and we beat them tomorrow. It's not going to be easy. But I think, as you say, on the flip of it, don't lose. Let's get out of the habit of losing games, because it's obviously that's a good habit to get out of, because we've been in that habit far too much this season. And obviously, Neil said about the press conference, and it was the Klopp felt like it was good to come into a press conference on the back of a win. And what, as fans, what we're all hoping is that win can kickstart our season. We've been saying that for about maybe 3 or 4 weeks. Every time we had a good result, we'd say, "Oh, is this the one that's going to kickstart the season?" But I think with the obviously return of some key players from injury, obviously performances coming on, off the bench, Virgil being back and probably in contention for tomorrow, it does feel like Monday was a bit of a turning point. And I know, but it's like you just said, 17 games left. You're just under half the season left, which is mad when you think about where we're at. So all those things combined, I think it is just that, going into tomorrow, it would be great if we can go there and get a win. But flip side as well, don't forget, the only team we've lost to this season, Newcastle, is us, and we know how obviously that panned out, in the 8th minute of injury time. So will Newcastle be wanting to, prove a point? Will they be wanting to, get one, stick one on as for their only loss? And also, it's not going to be. I can't see it being a 4-3, because Newcastle, I think, have only conceded 13 goals all season. So they've built their season on really being tight. So looking at it, I can't wait for the game. But there's so many variables that, you can almost say, throw a dice and say that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and the variables include, team selection. I've saw one of the comments coming through there. Well, Newcastle rest players for the cup final next week. For us, we've got, a big game on Tuesday. And, you can look at that 2 ways, really. You think, well, do you try and get Jota, Virgil, maybe even Bobby some minutes in the legs, just so they're options at least, for Tuesday, throwing any of them in to start, on Tuesday, reasonably cold. Yeah, Virgil's not been out as long as the other 2, but, it is a sort of a big shout, really. But even if you're looking at someone like Jota and Firmino off the bench, surely the more minutes they can play sort of before that, the better. So it works sort of both ways, and then you go in the other way and looking at who you can sort of rest. And so, the question marks come massively from, we don't know what both teams are going to be putting out. There's a little bit of a mindset thing, with look, it's a big team for both teams for reasons we've described, and both teams want to win it. But there is other things, in the back of the mind there as well, where you don't want to get injured and things like that. And so, It is, and then someone again pointed out on the comments about Liverpool's away form that the Neil sort of flashed up, and that is a factor. Really, it is a two away wins in the Premier League this season. It's poor, isn't it? And you're talking about going to a good team with the defensive record that Paul's just said there, and you'd be arrogant to just say we're going to roll them based on one win against a team of crap, and so I think it's they need to be on it. They'll take some beating on Saturday night. That's not to say we can't do it, but they'll take some beating.
More on Newcastle themselves in a minute or two, Neil. I'm struck by firstly, obviously where Chelsea are as well, the Spurs and Conte, and the Conte thing just all seems a bit miserable, to be quite honest with you. I actually found it quite sad reading his remarks today about the fact that he's tried to force himself back and go from there and all of that. What's ultimately it isn't just the idea of obviously getting to Newcastle. They are the final sort of one here. Liverpool have got these other sides as well. They've got to find their way through and round. And it's going to be a tough, it is this idea of they're also going for this as well. They're running along this one as well. And I think it is going to be, from a top four point of view, I expect Spurs and Chelsea to end up rearing their head in it in the same way I expect Liverpool to. I don't think it's just the idea of seeing off Newcastle and then everything's fine. I think that these are other good sides who are going to be able to find their way through.
Yeah, I think Chelsea definitely. I think Spurs might be in trouble with the midfield injuries that they've got, and you look at the sort of, if you were looking at Liverpool's midfield as a weak link, you're looking at Spurs as now and saying, well, Pape Sarr and Oliver Skip sort of having to play a fair few games. They've got obviously problems with Højbjerg, with Bissouma. With Bentancur out for the season, obviously Lloris is out, so they're playing Fraser Forster. So they look like they're going to have to rely on their front players really to sort of absolutely, deliver a lot of wins maybe they don't deserve, or just get them over the line in games. I don't know how sustainable that is. In a Conte side, they don't seem to play that way where you think, well, if they can just go and smash teams in the first half and get 3-0 up and then sort of hang on, they're a little bit more structured, aren't they, Spurs? But I think you look at the quality Chelsea are putting on the field every week, and what they're doing at the moment can't carry on. I think it's 2 wins in 14, is it, that they've got? That's crazy, isn't it? For a team with that much, even before this spending spree, that was poor form for Chelsea, wasn't it? So I would look at them and think, some point it clicks. Some point they stumble upon the right formula with the 4-2-3-1. João Felix looks like a very good player, doesn't he? He looks like he's going to be a really important player for them. What they get around them with Mudryk and Ziyech and Havertz, whoever else, I think they'll find the formula. So I think you're looking at Liverpool sort of almost get some ground made up before they do. Sort of put yourself in a position where they're having to do it under pressure as well, because you've got yourselves in gear. So don't wait for them to do it. But yeah, you're looking at that top four. I do think Newcastle are the ones. I don't like giving him credit because he likes to take his own credit. But Ian Doyle from the Echo has been saying that, even when Newcastle was sort of in better form than they are now, I think, he was saying they're the ones that'll drop out. They're the ones that'll drop out. And he said it about Leicester a couple of seasons ago. It's always going to be Leicester. They're the ones who are going to drop out. I think you have to look at Newcastle the same way. I think United will be a bit too far away. But Newcastle are the ones in catch, and I would say to Liverpool and Chelsea are the ones who are going to catch them. I wouldn't write Spurs off, but I think it'll be more difficult for them.
Okay, coming up, we have got, if you listen to this as a podcast, me talking to Sajid Iqbal about a fundraiser around Syria and Turkey, the awful scenes there, and John talking to Chris Roberts about his book. It is the Anfield Wrap. It is TAW Live. We are looking ahead to the big one at the weekend. We'll be back very, very soon to do that. And we are back. If you have listened to this as a podcast, thank you very much to Saj and to Chris for coming in and having a chat to us. We are going to move forward now, and we're going to talk. There's an interesting little piece, Neil. I'll come to you on it. It seems a bit ridiculous to me, pushing some notion of a rivalry. People have been mentioning it in the comments as we're going, some sort of nascent rivalry between Liverpool and Newcastle. It seems that there's a desperation to create a rivalry with Newcastle amongst so many teams. Sorry, a rivalry to create a desperation to create a rivalry with Liverpool amongst so many teams. That always seems to happen, as though you can't really define yourself as a football team until you've got a rivalry with the Reds. I don't feel any greater or lesser rivalry. Obviously, I've got my own views on who should or shouldn't be allowed to own football clubs, but I don't feel any greater or lesser rivalry with Newcastle right now than I did 6, 12, 18, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ago. It just all seems like a load of nonsense to me.
Yeah, I don't see the rivalry. I mean, you saw the rivalry in the game in August. You know, they did stoke the fire Newcastle quite well, didn't they, in that game? And you know, I remember the goal going in, and I remember the reaction of the crowd around me, sort of as they were leaving, really made up that Liverpool had beaten them because of the way that they'd sort of gone about the game. You know, they were doing a fair bit of time wasting. There was a bit of needle between the benches, wasn't there? And there was obviously Nick Pope, I think, was doing a fair bit of going down on the ground and taking his time. But that was, I've seen that happen with teams. I mean, I remember Steven Gerrard's Aston Villa doing that last season and sort of the same kind of anger. I remember, we've seen Everton do it, haven't we? Towards the back end of last season, it didn't feel like it was anything that was going to sort of linger and last. I'm guessing. I mean, I can't speak for the writer. I can't speak for the reason behind it, but I guess maybe it's coming from the Newcastle side that maybe they have been a bit angered by some of Klopp's comments. That he's saying about ceilings and state-owned clubs and financial power. Maybe that's starting to grate on them, and it's sort of they're eyeing Liverpool as a scalp in terms of we'd love to put one over them, we'd love to shut them up almost, and maybe that's where the idea come from. The most fascinating thing I thought in the entire article was the fact that in the 74 Cup final they were level on trophies. The two clubs were level on trophies going into the 74 Cup final. That blew my mind in terms of that. So. Yeah, it'll be a long time before that's ever said again. Even despite the financial power that Newcastle are having and are going to have. But in terms of a sort of a toxic rivalry development, I haven't seen it yet. I've seen a sort of a needly game and a little bit of time wasting, but not much else.
Paul, I haven't got the energy. So Ashby's just put in the comments, we have enough rivals, don't need more. I just haven't got the energy for this.
I know.
It just all feels to me like absolutely confected nonsense.
It is because, as Neil said, it was a game where I remember the celebrate. I didn't get a ticket for that one, and I remember celebrating and I was like a madman because of what had gone on before. Like Neil said, it was how Pope had gone down within the injury time for another 2 minutes or something, and then when we scored in the 8th or 9th minute, they were kicking off, and you think, no lads, that's what you've done. You've brought that on. It was you.
We were there for the taking.
Exactly.
The ironic thing, that was always my takeaway from it. Was genuinely we were there for the taking. We were in terrible nick at the time, and they just sort of limped along through the second half. Barely had a shot second half.
Yeah, I'm sure they had one disallowed as well. That was really tight on VAR. You know what I mean? So you look back and you think, I think that's maybe why as well the Newcastle fans have they've seen the backsides with it, because obviously on another night they could have easily come away from Anfield with 3 points, and they've actually come away with nothing. And again, it's their only defeat of the season. So maybe it's that trying to, as you say, trying to get this rivalry up. As far as I'm concerned, and every red I know, there is none.
The part of it as well for me, John, is that I think that there's an enormous respect towards Newcastle, and part of that this Bobby 90 stuff this weekend. You look at Robson and what he did for English football, the nature of his career, the nature of the personality that he was, the battles he had to fight, the countries he went to, what he did. And I'm made up to celebrating him on Saturday. I think it'll make the atmosphere even bigger than it would be for a 5:30 against Newcastle. But it's exactly the sort of thing that someone like he deserves. And as part of that, he's very much someone from the Northeast. I know you went to university in Newcastle, for God's sake. The idea that there should be any real form of rivalry between Liverpool and Newcastle, to me, I just feel as though it's people pulling at straws. And I hope the stuff that they're trying to do around Bobby Robson goes down well.
Yeah, and I'm sure it will. It's interesting, hearing Neil's take from it, because, it's not something I necessarily thought of, but, he is someone who's close, I believe, to the hierarchy in Newcastle, and someone who, is someone who, is maybe being fed a little bit from there. Why? I don't know, whether they feel like, someone that's going to elevate them a little bit in status is not just sort of league position, but also, the idea of rivalry with bigger clubs. Maybe it's something that they feel that they need. I don't know, but I think you sort of need to separate, if it is the club from the fans here a little bit. I would imagine that Newcastle fans are reading that today just as bemused as we are, really. There's no problem when they come down here. They treat it like European away, don't they? They're down early, they're drinking in pubs all afternoon and singing and stuff like that. And, aside from the odd sort of, snobby comment that you'll get from Scousers when anyone does anything, to be honest with you, because we're so full of self-importance that, there's nothing else sort of going on really. And so it is odd, and it just sort of feels like someone who's a writer who's a bit sort of removed from reality and the idea of, the supporters who are sort of paying to get in, who, like we've all said, I've got other things to worry about. Listen, Everton might go down, Luke. I can't, Liverpool are mad. We've got a European Cup game on Tuesday. Everton might go down, and you're asking me to worry about Newcastle. It's not happening.
It's not happening, indeed. Listen, the one or two technical issues, we can't hear them. So I'm not being funny about it. We just can't hear them. I'm doing all sorts of stuff, moving microphones around and all that. So I apologise if that's the case, but literally we can't hear them with reference to each other. And a couple of things have changed as we've gone. So we'll try and get to the bottom of them for whenever this comes out. And let me remind myself of approximately what time this is so Andy can clear it up later on. I want to talk about the nature of the opponent and their history and complexity, Paul, and obviously the now. For them, the next week's obviously massive. We talked about the fact that they've got the League Cup final on the horizon, and in general, at some sort of point, there is an expectation they will be playing Champions League football at some point in the future. It's not an unreasonable one that they do end up there, and that's why for them, this game on Saturday is massive. They've got all the stuff they're doing around Bobby Robson. For me, though, that suggests to me they've done a lot of what they've done this year by staying solid, by being quite unemotional, by picking the moment. And I do sort of wonder whether or not it could actually play into our hands, the idea of a big rowdy Saturday night. Listen, we've conceded too many early goals for me to be too complacent about it. But if we can see our way through to 0-0 on 20, I just sort of wonder if there could be a bit of space for us to counter-attack into, if there could be a bit of them over-committing, which is what they haven't been doing.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I think some of the people in the comments were saying about about being worried about Sam Maximin on the break and things like that, and other players like that. Almiron's obviously quite pacey, but again, it all depends how the game plays out, doesn't it? I think you're spot on again, Neil, to say don't concede early reds, because like I alluded to it earlier that Newcastle have got a really good defensive record, so you don't want to be chasing 2 or 3 goals to win a game. So I think, as you say, we can get to 20. I think it will be really important to see where we go from there. I also agree with what you're saying. I think the atmosphere helps us. I think there's times when when we've gone to grounds where you expect to go and get 3 points and for whatever reason it hasn't happened, and that maybe is it because the atmosphere isn't I know a lot of teams get up for it when you play Liverpool, but I think the atmosphere I think it should help us. I mean, I might be completely wrong, but hopefully if we can come out and I think keep it tight, and obviously then try and, you mentioned about, Trippier, again with Nunes, he's going to be a key. I think that's a key battle in the game. And I think if we can, get at them, because I don't think it's going to be one of those games where it's like end-to-end stuff. I might be completely wrong, but I think it's going to be a bit more like a chess game tomorrow. And again, it's one of those, take your chances, maybe get a little bit of slice of luck along the way and see where you go from there. And again, whether are they going to be thinking about the cup final a week on Sunday? I don't think they are, because I don't think they can afford to, because the position they've got themselves in. And Neil said it earlier, they've got themselves in that position with not, you wouldn't say it's a well-beaten squad. There's some players there who are just, they're doing really well. They're playing well for the team. They're playing well for Howe. And you've got to think there that if results start going against them, so let's say we do manage to get a win tomorrow, how they respond to that, then they go to the cup final, who knows what happens there, but let's say they do get beat on that, all of a sudden things can unravel very quickly, and I don't think Newcastle will want that to start with a performance that they don't want tomorrow.
In terms of getting through the first 20, Neil Jones, there's something around the fact that what Newcastle have been all season is physically imposing. So, they've had runs where it's Burn left back, Joe Linton left-hand side, and Willock. And the three of them got everything physically, gifts between the three of them, everything that you need in that area of the pitch. I think Almiron's ability to graft and be sensible is underrated. On top of his other skills, it's interesting the manager goes out of his way to praise him earlier today. Longstaff's become important for them, but they're without Willock. Joe Linton can't play in 2 positions. Gimenez is obviously suspended. He's not available either. So whilst there's been a lot around this side, Trippier can get up and down, but if he's trying to get up and down, he's going to leave a big hole behind him from a Liverpool point of view. This is a good time to play them, I think, despite the 5:30, despite the idea of a festival feel. I agree, they'll be buoyed by the cup final on the horizon, not the opposite. But this is a good time to play them for this Liverpool side, I think. I don't think we could ask for much more in terms of going to St James's Park this season.
No, especially you're right. I mean, Guimaraes is probably their key player, isn't he? And he's obviously missing. I think probably after that, it's Trippier and the goalkeeper. I think are probably the next two for me. Almiron's obviously had a great season. I think he might be a doubt as well. He went off, didn't he, with a knock against Bournemouth. So never mind whether he's able to start. He might not be able to do 90. You know, they might not want to do that. So you might be seeing a position where he's going off in the game. Are the replacements up to scratch? You know, people like Jacob Murphy, and you know, obviously they've got Isak and Wilson, sort of one or the other, isn't it? I think Isak's going to be a very good player, but he's probably behind Wilson. You know, if they're both fit. And also, I mean, I suppose the other thing is Liverpool. Liverpool showed a lot of the things that we've been asking them to show recently, didn't we? You know, you look at on Monday night, they showed second balls, they showed fight, they winning the duels, they showed taking advantage of counter-attacking opportunities. They showed a bit of strength in depth off the bench, you know, to come on and change the game or see out the game. So they go in with a little bit of positivity, albeit with the Everton caveat of the fact that they're not up to much.
They're 18th. It's just the fact of the matter. They're just 18th. You know what I mean? So that you got to remember that bit.
Yeah, of course. But Liverpool have been playing like they're 18th, haven't they? So you know,
absolutely.
What you wanted to see was Liverpool play properly. You know, in terms of do the things that we used to. The fullbacks were influential. So I do think a lot depends on what you said. Really, is how do you start the game Liverpool wise? Do you give anything away like you did at Wolves, like you did at Brighton? You know, at the start of the second half, like you did at Brentford. You know, in that spell, if you give nothing away, you would hope Liverpool will gain confidence from that and feel away and start to use some of them gifts. You know, you've got Gakpo potentially with a bit of confidence after getting his first goal. I mean, to be honest, I think we saw his confidence in that half hour after he'd scored. You know, it was like he'd sort of had an energy drink, wasn't it? And he was sort of, right, give me the ball. Can he take that into the next game, or do you lose? You know, does he lose that momentum? I think there's a lot of reasons to sort of be hopeful if you're a Liverpool fan. But with the caveat of, you know, I went to Brentford thinking they were going to win. I went to Brighton, you know, come out for the second half of the Brighton game and thought, well, he can't be as bad as they were in the first half. And yes, they were. Went to Wolves, you know, I went to Wolves and thought, well, this is going to be a tight one. You know, there's not going to be more than the odd goal in this because of the way Wolves are, and you let 3 in. So there's a lot of. You could sort of spin a coin almost in what happens, but I've got a slight feeling I think Liverpool might turn up and give what I would call an adult performance in this game, and that's what's required, I think, you know, from a Liverpool point of view.
It's making me think of Spurs away, this one a little bit, Paul. That was a certain kick-off time as well. They're in good shape. Again, they're physically robust, but they were also going to play on the front foot, and Liverpool played on the counter and did so really, really effectively. It's given me that vibe. It wouldn't surprise me if he makes one change, perhaps in the middle of the park. He name checks Keita in his press conference, which he often doesn't do. He very rarely goes out of his way to name a footballer he's not asked about, and he does name Keita, which makes me wonder whether or not he might have an eye on the idea that obviously it's a big turnaround Saturday, Tuesday. He'll want moves from the bench as well. I do wonder whether or not we might just get Naby Keita off the right or something like that. What you're expecting? How do you think we're going to go?
I think he might do, because I think, again, Henderson, obviously, you know, I don't know some of the comments in the thing about his rivalry with Newcastle, but I think that'll be put aside by Klopp. So I think he might do what you've just said. Again, the fact that he's name checked him in the conference. I think he'll bring Van Dijk back in. People might say that's harsh, but I think he will. I'm not too sure who for, though, to be honest with you, because again, both you know, Gomez and Matip have been up and down this season. But I thought on Monday they both played well. I couldn't really fault either of them. Maybe Gomez was slightly better, but I do think he'll bring Van Dijk back in. And then again, I think he'll keep the front 3. I think, you know, like Neil said, Gakpo's, you know, confidence just seemed to lift in it as soon as he got that goal. We got one turned in the middle, went past 3 or 4 men. So, you know, again, you'd like to think he's going to start with those 3. Maybe one change in midfield, maybe one change at the back. So that's what I think he'll go with. But who knows?
It's dead hard because, you know, on one hand, you want to keep people fresh for Tuesday, and it is tight. It's obviously a later kick-off on Saturday, then into Tuesday night. I think if it was Saturday, Wednesday, you can really make the argument to pick the team that starts again against Madrid. But with it being so tight, it's tough. And because in one way, you know, you think you look at, for example, the axis on that right-hand side, Trent and Salah and Henderson, and how well that worked, and you think, oh, it'd be great to ask them to sort of go again on that, because, you know, it did work so well, but then Jordan just looks like that break's just done him a world of good. So to then go, right, okay, it's 3 games in 9 days, please, George, just seems a little bit silly when the proof is in the pudding. It basically what happened to him was he had too many games in his legs. So it's tough. It's a tough one, really. He's got tough decisions all over the place. Do you ask lads to do 60 and then say we're going to sort of take you off no matter what, or do you ask for big last 20-25 from someone like Henderson? But if we have a fair 60-65 like we do at Wolves, then it doesn't matter who comes on. We could throw us four on, at the back, couldn't we? So I think it's hard. The one I think he will do is Virgil. I think it's a big shout to throw someone in cold against Madrid. Even though they have got a few forwards out, I think it's he'll want to play. I think Virgil obviously gets the substitute performance. Well, substitute performance. The only the only thing he did was hold that ball dead eye, wasn't he? Out the reach of the Everton boys. But he's back in the squad, so I think he'll play. And then I've got a sneaky suspicion he might do Jota and just ask him to do 60, just to get him a bit sharper for if he does need him on Tuesday nights.
Neil, what do you think he does?
Yeah, I think he basically said today. Van Dijk will start. He was asked. I think he was asked outright. Is Van Dijk in a position to start? He said, yeah. He should be. He said he looked ready in training, and he looked ready. I assume he looked ready again today. So I expect him to come in. Big question is probably who for, isn't it? I would probably say it'd be for Matip, for pace, and also just. Probably just as a punishment for that one moment against Everton where he missed the ball, and you just can't afford to do that. We can all laugh about it now. We've won, isn't it? But you still did that in a game after you had a nightmare at Wolves. We still need that more reliability. I thought Gomez had his second best game of the season. City was obviously being the best, and I thought you can argue about Ellis Sims and the value of playing him from an Everton perspective, but he had a good game. And I think maybe the pace on the counter attack of Gomez just potentially gives Liverpool a better bit of protection. I think there will be a change in midfield. One of Fabinho or Henderson to miss out, with Keita to come in. I would probably say you would go Keita for Bajcetic. For Keita with Bajcetic, so for Fabinho to miss out, and then I think the front three, I think it'll stay as is. I think they'll go Nunes, Gakpo, Salah. We don't talk to him, but Elliott's played some games, hasn't he? Started a fair bit. He's been featured in every game. I don't think he'll get the nod, but he'll be hoping to start a game like this. They made some. Keita got the winner there last season, didn't he? Played towards the back end of the season, so
really good performance as well.
Yeah, it did. I seem to remember Jota being particularly good in that game as well.
Milner started to play as well.
Yeah, and Gomez played right back, didn't he? So he made a lot of changes, obviously, back end of the season. I don't think he'll go quite as extreme. I don't think we'll be seeing Tsimikas and people like that, or Milner at fullback. I think he'll stick with the bulk of the first team, but I think there'll probably be two. I think the centre back and the centre midfielder, I think there'll be one of each in there. And I would probably say Fabinho and Matip to be the two to step out.
Okay, thank you very much indeed to Paul, to Neil, and to John. Everyone who's contributed all the way through the show as well. Do check out all the stuff we put out about the report into the Champions League final across the course of the week if you haven't had the ability to do so already. Hopefully you've been able to find your way through that. Do download the app as well. All the reaction you need post-match after Newcastle versus Liverpool. It's an enormous game. It really is an enormous game, but an enormous game does not a rivalry make. See you later.